This past season, the Sacramento Kings finished as the number 3 seed in the West at 48-34. Their first playoff appearance since the 2006 season. 17 years of trying to make it back to the playoffs, and they finally did it. A franchise that has been riddled with dysfunctional methodology for over a decade. Losing superstars, missing on draft picks, and terrible free agency decisions have plagued the Kings. But finally, they were able to make it back to the playoffs and become competitive again. But how were they able to do it? How did a dysfunctional franchise figure it out and make it back to the playoffs with a young, improving roster? The Kings have missed on many draft picks throughout the years. Only one player drafted by the Kings has made the All-Star team while still playing for the Kings since 2002. That player was DeMarcus Cousins. Cousins was the Kings' franchise player, but the front office was unable to surround Cousins with enough talent to make the playoffs, so they ended up trading him to the Pelicans, where the Kings got back a first-round pick in 2017 that ended up being the 10th overall pick, and Buddy Hield, an important piece that would help them later down the line. The Kings were in full rebuild mode, and in the 2017 draft, they held the 5th and 10th overall picks.
With the 5th pick in the 2017 NBA Draft, the Sacramento Kings select De'Aaron Fox.
At the 5th overall pick, the Kings selected point guard De'Aaron Fox, who would become an important piece on the 22-23 Kings roster. With the 10th overall pick, they traded down with Portland and got picks 15 and 20, where they selected Justin Jackson and Harry Giles. The Kings also in years prior traded for the draft rights to Bogdan Bogdanovic, who had been playing in Serbia the past 3 years and decided to finally come to the NBA. The Kings stacked up on a lot of young talent, and many said this draft was a huge win for the Kings. The Kings' whole rebuild was now centered around the point guard they took 5th overall. De'Aaron Fox's rookie season with the Kings started out good. He averaged 11 points per game with 4 assists per game. It was a solid first campaign in the NBA for Fox, showing flashes of the player he could be for the Kings franchise. While this promising talent was on the rise, the Kings still sucked, finishing with a 27-55 record, good enough for the 2nd overall pick in the NBA draft. This was their chance to fast-track themselves back to a good roster, as they had a chance to pick a generational talent, but instead they took Marvin Bagley, who would end up being a bust. The 2018-19 season was a good surprise for the Kings fans. The Kings had their best season in a long time, finishing 9th in the West at 39-43 under head coach Dave Yeager. Buddy Hield averaged 20 points per game and Fox averaged 17 points per game, with their 2nd overall pick finishing 3rd in points per game on the team at 14 for Marvin Bagley. The Kings mid-season traded for Harrison Barnes, sending Justin Jackson and Zach Randolph to the Mavericks. The Kings got a veteran wing that could help this extremely young team for the next couple years. It seemed like the Kings were finally turning the corner, and that the next few seasons would be the chance for this young core to turn things around for the Kings franchise. Unfortunately for the Kings fans, the front office had to step in and ruin things, as Dave Yeager was fired after the Kings' best season in a long time. He was fired because of deteriorating relationships with the front office, so they felt it was time to bring in a new voice. The Kings hired former Lakers head coach Luke Walton to lead the team. After being fired by the Lakers that year, the Kings jumped at the bit to hire Walton. Walton couldn't make the playoffs with LeBron James, so how was he going to do it with an even worse team? This hiring was questioned by many, but still, the Kings had that young, improving core that could hopefully exceed bad coaching. Before the season started, there was hope for Kings fans that they might make the playoffs and watch a fun young team play good basketball. Well, unfortunately for them, that wouldn't happen, and they would underperform for the next 3 years under Luke Walton. Throughout the 3 years of Luke Walton's tenure with the Kings, they never surpassed 32 wins in a season. The Kings were stuck in mediocrity, not good enough to make the playoff push, but not bad enough to finish in the top 5 picks. What seemed like an emerging young Big Three quickly deteriorated, as Marvin Bagley seemed to never improve on the offensive end and couldn't play defense for the life of him. He also had a terrible relationship with Luke Walton. Buddy Hield's number only slowly declined as rumor after rumor came up about him wanting to be traded. The only bright spot throughout these dreadful years under Luke Walton was De'Aaron Fox, who averaged 23 points per game and 6 assists, shooting 47% from the field over the 3-year span under Walton. Eventually, Luke Walton was fired mid-season during the 2021-2022 campaign, and the Kings were on the search for another head coach. The one bright spot for the Kings throughout the Walton years was the drafts. The drafts were surprisingly good for the future of the Kings and helped them become the team they are today. Their biggest selection was in 2020 when the Kings selected Tyrese Haliburton. Haliburton is an extremely talented player who has a bright future in the NBA. The other big pick was Davion Mitchell in 2021, who was a defensive stopper at the guard position and would help tremendously for the bench unit of the Kings. During this 2021 season, the Kings had 3 guards that they drafted in Fox, Haliburton, and Mitchell. There were too many guards on the roster and too few minutes to give out, so the Kings decided to trade Haliburton and Buddy Hield for Domantas Sabonis. The Kings had their first good big man since DeMarcus Cousins was traded. The Kings had bet the future on De'Aaron Fox and Domantas Sabonis, hoping this dynamic duo could finally win some games and help the franchise make the playoffs. The Kings Kings started the offseason by making a great move, hiring Warriors assistant coach Mike Brown to be their new head coach, which would be one of the smartest hirings in their franchise's history. The Kings also had a huge offseason in the player department as well, trading for Kevin Huerter from the Hawks and signing Malik Monk to the team, and drafting Keegan Murray 4th overall. These huge additions in the offseason would help the team surpass expectations and compete at a high level. Most publications had the Kings finishing 10th or lower in the Western Conference. Many believed the Kings roster was not good enough to make the playoffs, let alone the play-in game, so it came as a shock to the world when the Kings looked really, really good.
Monk around the Sabonis screen. Huerter for three.
The Kings started their season off rough, going 0-4, but then they started to win a lot. The Kings went on a 7-game win streak early in the season, which gave way to the famous Light the Beam. The Kings would be 32-25 at the All-Star break, good for 3rd in the West, while having 2 players make the All-Star team for the first time in 20 years. De'Aaron Fox and Domantas Sabonis were the All-Star duo this Kings franchise desperately needed. The great coaching of Mike Brown, bringing in the off-ball motion that was so prevalent on the Steve Kerr Warriors, helped this team tremendously. The Kings had the best offense in the NBA, scoring 120 points per game, and it had an offensive rating of 119. De'Aaron Fox averaged 25 points per game and 6 assists per game. His partner in crime, Sabonis, averaged 19 points per game and 12 rebounds. Both players made the 3rd team All-NBA after their amazing seasons. The Kings would end the season going 16-9 and finish as the 3rd seed in the West, a placing not a single expert expected before the season started. The Kings had surprised the world. After 17 years, the Kings had finally made it back to the playoffs. The Kings would end up facing their big brothers, the Golden State Warriors, a veteran team coming off of a championship falling far below expectations, facing off against a young, hungry team who exceeded all expectations. Mike Brown versus Steve Kerr would be a chess game as they know everything about each other's teams. It was the Battle of California in the first round, and the Kings would not go down without a fight. In Game 1 of this series, the Kings came out and fought with everything they had. Monk and Fox both dropped 30 bombs in their 126-123 victory over the Warriors in Game 1. They showed the world that the Kings were here to stay. In Game 2, the Kings came out and punched the Warriors in the face, stunning the world as the Kings would go up 2-0 in the series after cooking the Warriors 114-106. The Kings up 2-0 were primed to win the series, but as they say, a playoff series doesn't ever really start without somebody winning a game on the road. The Warriors would bounce back in back-to-back games off the back of Steph Curry dominating and tie the series up at 2 apiece. The series would head back up to Sacramento in a decisive Game 5. Unfortunately for the Kings, they would lose home court and go down 3-2 in the series. Everything was on the line in Game 6, back in San Francisco. This young team had come too far to fall now. The Kings had came out guns blazing and blew the Warriors out of their own building, winning 118-93, taking back home court and forcing a Game 7 back in Sacramento. Things looked prime for the Kings to win the series and make it to the 2nd round of the playoffs, but things didn't go as planned. Off the heroics of Steph Curry's 50 bomb in Game 7, the Warriors would win and eliminate the Sacramento Kings from the playoffs. The Kings came so close to surpassing the world's expectations and beating the defending champs, but just fell short. The Kings, a franchise filled with failure, has finally made it to the point of relevance. Their young team and budding superstar De'Aaron Fox has spearheaded this team back to an extremely bright future. With young players Davion Mitchell and Keegan Murray only improving, this Kings team has a chance to become one of the best young teams in the NBA under the tutelage of 2023 Coach of the Year Mike Brown. Hopefully the Kings can continue their rise to glory and continue to light the beam.